Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So let me begin. Thank you everyone for being at this presentation. I'm going to be talking about strategies to improve survey rates. And let me begin by providing an introduction. As you know, all of us who are attending this particular online conference are concerned, we particularly examine ways by which we could probably improve our teaching practice. So therefore, we're part of the Scholarship of Learning and Teaching. And if you're going to be involved in trying to make interventions in the way we teach, it's often important for us to determine if there is some effect as a result of our teaching practices. So we need to determine, for example, whether or not if we do this and that, they have been effective. And we could try to determine the efficacy of those interventions, perhaps by using surveys, or we could use qualitative interviews or some other form of methodology. But one of the more popular ways by which interventions relating to scholarship of learning and teaching are often examined is through the use of surveys. And as we all know, a lot of us are often bombarded by surveys from all sorts of sectors, and so do our students. Not only are we talking in the sense of getting students to answer the term and have your say unit surveys, we do often have other interventions from across the university, which ask students to answer different kinds of surveys. So at some point, there appears to be a survey fatigue. There are just too many surveys that bombard students and respondents that they no longer desire to actually answer surveys. So there is a survey fatigue, and as a result, there is often a very low response rate to surveys. And this has been observed consistently by a number of researchers. The problem with having very low response rates, as we know, is that they can bias the results. And if the response rates are low, we may have difficulty saying that whatever results we have are in fact generalizable across the population. And the other problem with having low response rates as well is that the researchers might actually think that what they're doing in terms of, let's say, the scholarship of learning and teaching, is that it is something that's uninteresting. It hasn't really captured the attention of potential respondents, so that they think, it's not worth getting involved in a research project. And if we have to think that a lot of us do have the responsibility to engage more deeply in terms of scholarship of learning and teaching, and if you consider the fact that we do need to get our students most of the time to answer these surveys, we need to consider constantly that question of how do we improve survey response rates. And a lot of the researchers, Dave, for example, has said that having a high response rate is still akin to reaching nirvana. So that's, in fact, for a lot of people, the gold standard is that the more responses you have and the higher the response rate, then the better would your research be. And the higher is the likelihood that any results you have will be accepted for publication in academic journals. And so this was the issue that we confronted. And as I will show you in this presentation, we did initially try to implement our first survey, which wasn't very effective, and which made us wonder if there was something wrong about the intervention we were trying to implement, and trying to determine what was the reason why the response rate was very low. I also want to point out that if we become successful, for example, in getting students to engage with our surveys, then there is also the likelihood that students will also engage more with the end of term have you say unit surveys, which is actually happening at this time because it's the end of the term. And given the fact that the university does impose an expectation that about 50% of the cohort of students should answer surveys, then I think this particular presentation may provide some use to you as viewers. I'd also like to point out that this particular project is part of a Scholarship of Learning and Teaching research grant. the study is not about survey response rate itself. It's actually about positivity in learning, which I'll discuss in a short while. But in the course of trying to implement an intervention about positivity in learning, we needed first to confront the problem of how to get students to engage with our study and answer initially the pre-test survey. So as I mentioned, our study is really about trying to inject positivity in student learning. And the way we did this was to actually develop 10-minute video podcasts pertaining to positivity. There were a lot of topics. One topic, for example, was about what is positivity. Another podcast will talk about the difference between ants or automatic negative thoughts as opposed to planting optimistic thoughts, and so on. So there were 5 topics. And the purpose of these podcasts was actually to teach students certain positivity strategies and how, for them, for example, how to improve their mental health and how to deal with current and future stress. When we first embarked on this project and submitted an application for ethics approval and submitted an application to get funding under the Scholarship of Learning and Teaching grant of CQUniversity, there wasn't any COVID-19 yet. And we just thought that given that students often have a lot of stresses, as we all do, for students it could be stresses about how to do well in studying, how to get better grades, or even how to just pass a unit. And a lot of students who might also happen to be mature age students also do struggle with personal problems like family issues, divorce, sicknesses, taking care of a family member, and so on. And all of these personal stresses, which happen to us as academics as well, do have an impact on student learning. And so what we were hoping to do was to try to teach students positivity strategies that would help them in becoming more effective in learning. And as far as our study went, we know that for some of you, you might be familiar with that branch of psychology called positive psychology. And according to positive psychology, for example, if people have a higher sense of level of positivity, if they have a very positive outlook about life, then they typically perform well either in school or in their work or even in their life situations. But a lot of these positivity studies that we have often involve full-blown courses across a term, for example, but there isn't any intervention yet that involves getting students to watch short videos that give them strategies about how to develop positivity. And so this was the implementation. This was the project that we had, which was to really improve mental health and teach students to deal with current and future stress. Now, the methodology that we adopted would involve surveys, both a pre-test and a post-test survey, as well as qualitative interviews. And the focus of my presentation would really be to talk about the survey, and not so much about the survey results, but really about the response rates. We are not yet ready to provide the results of the survey or the results of the qualitative interviews because our research isn't done yet. But I will talk about how to improve student response rates when a research team might be conducting a survey. So in terms of the survey, and I'd like to take note, I'd like to call your attention to the fact that this is an online survey. This involves an online survey, which I think involves a higher level of complexity, because if you were to have a paper-based survey and you wanted your students, for example, to fill up those surveys, you could just hand them the paper-based surveys, and because of some level of maybe social pressure, they're probably going to be responding to the paper-based survey. So you will then have a higher response rate. But because of COVID-19 and the restrictions, and given the fact that a lot of the teaching is now done online, we could only get the students to respond on the basis or through online surveys using SurveyMonkey. And so, as I mentioned, there are two parts of the survey. One is the pretest, and that is prior to the intervention or prior to the students watching the 10-minute video podcasts about positivity. And the other part of the survey would be the post-test. And so, after we've shown the 5 video podcasts across the term, we then needed to send them another survey to find out if there was any effect on their levels of learning and on their student experience as a result of the interventions that we had. I'd also like to point out that for this research, there were 4 discipline areas that were involved. We had the disciplines of law, property, and accounting from the School of Business and Law, and podiatry from the School of Health, Medical and Applied Sciences. And I'd also like to point out that we actually have Dr. Monica Cansal here, who is my co-researcher for this project. She has kindly joined me for this presentation, and she belongs to the accounting discipline. So there were 2 schools and 4 discipline areas that were involved in this project. The first survey, the pretest, had 41 questions. The bulk of the questions actually involved using the Oxford Happiness Questionnaire. There were 29 questions, the pretest, and then there is the pretest question about whether they felt they were going to complete the unit and so on. So in terms of the estimated completion time, that would usually involve 7 minutes according to SurveyMonkey. We sent out the invitation emails at week 3, and the survey closed at the end of week 5. The post-test survey involved 45 questions, again, according to SurveyMonkey. It takes about 7 minutes to complete this particular survey. The email invitation for the second survey was sent out at week 10, and their survey closes at the end of the exam week. So let's look at the impact of our invitations to get students to join the survey. I should point out that the email invitation does 2 things. 1, it gets them to first fill up the survey, and 2, it needs to be able to convince them to actually watch the videos. So if all they do is to just answer the surveys and they don't engage with the video podcasts and they don't watch it, then there's nothing for us to test. So we needed to find a way by which students engage both in terms of answering the survey and then watching the videos. Now, we first implemented this project in term 1 of 2020, which started, I think, in February of this year. And based on the design, we sent out an email invitation at week 3, which was around the 23rd of March. There were about 250 students enrolled across 5 units in the School of Business and Law and the School of Medical, Health, and Allied Services, I think. However, the problem was, even though we sent out emails, only 4 out of 250 students actually answered the survey and indicated that they wanted to be part of the project. So that was very unfortunate for us, and it was very discouraging to only get 4 students out of 250 students of the cohort responding to the survey, and which made us think: is our research uninteresting? Don't students want to know more about positivity? And there were some suggestions that it was probably because of COVID-19, where people were so busy and worried a lot that they couldn't even think about how to deal with their worry, just because they were just worrying too much. But that was the problem we had. And so we did it again. We didn't even run a post-test survey because 4 students to us was just insufficient to arrive at any remarkable results. We implemented the project again in term 2, which and at week 3 on the 27th of July across 5 units. We encouraged students to do the survey, and this time there were 65 students who said yes. That's an increase of about 1,525%. So there was a 26% student response rate, and we need, and the question for us: how did it happen? What changed? Notably, COVID-19 was still there, but we don't think it was because of COVID-19. It was because of the strategies we implemented in term 2 that we think got students to engage more with the surveys and as well as being involved in the research project. We did a poster survey in term 2. As of today, there are 22 students who have answered the survey. The survey will close at the end of the exam week, and we're going to be inviting students again to answer the poster survey a few days from today. We're going to send emails again. So what I'm going to do then is to talk about strategies to improve response rates. The first thing we need to remember is that if all you do, if we continue to think as academics when we kind of invite students to answer surveys, and it's in a language that's, you know, very much formal and academic, chances are students will not engage with it. We need to know that when we send out email invitations to students, we're actually involved in marketing. We're trying to sell them idea that they need to be part of the survey, that they need to engage in research. So there is some level of marketing involved. So the first letter invitation that we sent in term 1 was very formal, was very academic, and, you know, it was uninteresting. But we changed the language a bit the second time, that it was more catchy. It was something that, you know, would really titillate students to become part of the project. Secondly, the second email was shorter. It was punchier. So instead of talking about, instead of what we did in the first time, we talked about what the project is, what the benefits are, blah, blah, blah. This time we just said, you know, you could help us, this could help you, and so on. And that seemed to work. Thirdly, when we first sent out the email, it was just a regular email. Let's say that it was in my name as the lead investigator for this project. But we made a difference. We made a change in the second term, whereby we asked the unit coordinator who is part of the project to actually put his or her name as the one who sent out the email, to make it more personal, for the students to realize that there is some level, a very strong level of involvement on the part of the unit coordinator in the project. Fourth, we now constantly pitched and reminded students during the tutorials about the research and the survey and how it could be valuable to them. And number 5, we also posted the invitation on the Moodle site. So apart from the regular weekly messages on Moodle, right below that regular weekly message would be reminders about our project. So instead of the research project running, you know, as a separate activity, we kind of embedded it as part of the unit. So they were engaging in a substantive content, such as administrative law, for example, or constitutional law. But at the same time, the students got to feel that, you know, learning about positivity strategies was actually part of learning, or would actually enhance their learning of a core substantive subject. And more importantly, number 6, during the tutorials, we actually got students to respond to the survey. So this was probably a way of, you know, using the shotgun in front of them for the students to engage, to respond to the tutorial. So I'd say, you know, in the middle of the tutorial, I'd like, you know, you to spend 5 minutes just to answer the tutorial, and then we'll continue with the lessons. So in doing so, the students, in a sense, were a bit forced to, you know, do the tutorials, but it wasn't against our ethics application, because there was nothing that prevented us from doing that. And finally, we needed to get the entire team on board, so that everybody actually participates in getting students to, engage in the survey. So again, as a final reminder, we needed to make sure that we followed ethics constraints. We couldn't really compel students to do the surveys. We couldn't send them personal emails, and neither could we send out too many emails to students, because that could just be confusing and disturbing to them. So I guess that's it. Thank you for watching this presentation.